A devoted wife's husband vanished without a trace, 15 years ago, leaving her to raise their twin daughters alone, while drowning in debt and unanswered questions. But when she accidentally discovers him living under a new identity with a perfect family just 2 towns over, what she does next shocks everyone and changes the meaning of justice forever. Rebecca Martinez had always believed in fairy tales. Not the kind with glass slippers and pumpkin carriages, but the real kind where 2 people meet, fall in love, and build something beautiful together. She met David Kellner at a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix, Arizona, on a Tuesday morning in 1998. He was reading a newspaper, she was grading papers from her 3rd grade class, and when he offered to share his table, she said yes. Their courtship was the kind romance novels are written about. David was attentive, thoughtful, and completely devoted to Rebecca. He would leave little notes in her car, surprise her with her favorite flowers, and listen for hours as she talked about her students and her dreams of making a difference in their lives. When he proposed 2 years later on the same Tuesday morning at the same coffee shop, she did not hesitate to say yes. Their wedding was small but perfect, held in Rebecca's childhood church with both families in attendance. David worked as a construction foreman, Rebecca taught elementary school, and together they bought a modest 2-bedroom house on Willow Creek Drive. The white picket fence was not metaphorical. David built it himself, painting it fresh every spring. The twins arrived 3 years into their marriage. Isabella and Sophia, identical except for a tiny birthmark on Isabella's left shoulder. David was completely smitten, often falling asleep in the nursery rocking chair, with 1 baby in each arm. He would wake up at 2 in the morning for feedings without complaint, change diapers while making silly faces to make the girls giggle, and spend entire weekends building elaborate blanket forts in the living room. Rebecca's mother, Carmen, often said that David was the son she never had. He fixed her leaky faucets, mowed her lawn every Saturday, and never forgot her birthday or Mother's Day. Rebecca's father, who had died when she was 12, would have loved David, Carmen always said, the kind of man who keeps his word and takes care of his family. By 2008, their life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The twins were 5 years old, starting kindergarten at Rebecca's school, so she could keep an eye on them during the day. David had been promoted to project manager and was talking about starting his own construction company. They had paid off Rebecca's student loans and were saving for a bigger house, maybe something with a yard large enough for a swing set and a vegetable garden. March 23, 2008, started like any other Sunday. Rebecca made pancakes while David helped the twins get dressed for church. Isabella wanted to wear her pink dress with the butterfly sleeves. Sophia insisted on the blue one, with polka dots. David patiently braided their hair while Rebecca packed their diaper bag with coloring books and crackers to keep them quiet during the service. After church, they visited Carmen for Sunday dinner, a tradition they had maintained since the twins were born. David carved the roast while Rebecca helped her mother in the kitchen, and the twins played with a collection of dolls Carmen kept specifically for their visits. It was perfectly ordinary, perfectly happy, perfectly normal. David seemed quieter than usual during dinner, but Rebecca attributed it to stress at work. His current project, a new shopping center on the east side of town, had been giving him headaches for weeks. Permit delays, weather problems, a subcontractor who kept showing up late. Rebecca rubbed his shoulders while he did the dishes, and he leaned into her touch the way he always did. They put the twins to bed at 8 o'clock sharp, David reading from their favorite book about a brave little mouse who went on adventures. Rebecca tucked them in while David turned on their nightlight, the one that projected stars on the ceiling. The twins were asleep before Rebecca and David reached their own bedroom. That night, David held Rebecca a little tighter than usual. When she asked if everything was okay, he kissed her forehead and said he loved her more than she would ever know. Rebecca fell asleep feeling completely safe, completely loved, completely unaware that her husband was already gone. Rebecca woke up at 6:30 on Monday morning to an empty bed. David's side was cold, like he had been gone for hours. She found his coffee mug in the sink, rinsed and turned upside down to dry, the way he always left it. His work boots were gone from by the front door, his keys missing from the hook in the kitchen. Rebecca assumed he had left early for the job site, probably trying to deal with whatever crisis was waiting for him there. But David never came home that night, or the next night. By Wednesday, Rebecca was calling hospitals and police stations. her voice shaking as she described her husband to strangers who took notes and promised to call if they heard anything. By Friday, she was sitting in Detective Rodriguez's office, holding David's photograph with trembling hands while the detective asked questions that made no sense. Did David have any enemies? Any financial problems? Any reason to disappear voluntarily? Rebecca answered no to everything, her voice getting smaller with each question. David was not the kind of man who had enemies or secrets or reasons to run away. David was the kind of man who came home every night, who kissed his wife and daughters, who fixed broken things and kept his promises. The police searched everywhere. David's truck was found in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, keys still in the ignition, wallet on the passenger seat, with all his credit cards and identification intact. The security cameras showed David entering the diner at 11:47 on Sunday night, but there was no footage of him leaving. The night shift waitress remembered serving him coffee and pie, said he seemed nervous, kept checking his phone. He left a $20 tip on a $7 check and walked out the front door at 12:35 in the morning, and then nothing. No footprints, no witnesses, no trace of where David Kellner had gone. After walking out of that diner, it was as if he had simply vanished into the Arizona desert, leaving behind a wife who could not understand and twin daughters who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. The first year was the hardest. Rebecca took a leave of absence from teaching, unable to focus on lesson plans and parent conferences when her own world had collapsed. The twins, too young to understand why Daddy was not coming home, acted out in ways that broke Rebecca's heart. Isabella stopped eating, Sophia stopped sleeping, and both girls would burst into tears at random moments throughout the day. Rebecca's savings account dwindled as the search continued. Private investigators, reward money, flyers posted on every telephone pole and bulletin board in Phoenix. Carmen moved into the guest room to help with the twins and the bills, working double shifts at the hospital where she had been a nurse for 23 years. The mortgage payments fell behind, the credit cards maxed out. The twins outgrew their clothes faster than Rebecca could afford to replace them. The community rallied at first. Church members brought casseroles and offered babysitting. David's co-workers took up collections and organized search parties. Local news stations ran stories about the missing construction worker, showing David's photograph and asking anyone with information to call the police. But as months turned into years with no new leads, the phone calls stopped coming, the casseroles stopped arriving, and Rebecca learned what it meant to be truly alone. Rebecca returned to teaching after 18 months, not because she was ready, but because she had no choice. The twins needed food and clothes and medical insurance, and Rebecca's teacher salary was all that stood between them and complete financial ruin. She packed lunches with shaking hands, graded papers through tears, and smiled at parent conferences while her heart felt like it was made of broken glass. The twins adapted better than Rebecca did, the way children always do. They stopped asking when Daddy was coming home, and started asking if Mommy was okay. Isabella became the responsible one, helping Sophia with homework, and reminding Rebecca to eat dinner. Sophia became the entertainer, telling jokes and making silly faces whenever the sadness got too heavy. They were 7, then 8, then 9, growing up without the father who had loved them so completely. Rebecca never dated, never even considered it. How do you explain to someone new that your heart is still waiting for a man who disappeared without a trace? How do you build something new when the foundation of your old life is still cracked and bleeding? Rebecca poured herself into teaching and mothering, working second jobs during summers to pay for the twins' school supplies and activities, falling into bed exhausted every night in a house that still smelled like David's cologne. The insurance company fought her for 3 years before finally paying out David's life insurance policy. $50,000, enough to catch up on the mortgage and put some money away for the twins' college funds. Rebecca cried when the check arrived, not from relief but from the finality of it. Accepting that money felt like admitting David was never coming home, like giving up on the fairy tale she had built her life around. By the time the twins turned 15, Rebecca had become someone she barely recognized. The soft, trusting woman who had fallen in love at a coffee shop was gone, replaced by someone harder, more cautious, more realistic about the ways life can betray you without warning. She taught her daughters to be independent, to never rely completely on someone else for their happiness or security. She never said it out loud, but she was teaching them not to make her mistakes, The twins thrived despite everything. Isabella was student council president, Sophia was captain of the debate team, and both girls had inherited David's kindness and Rebecca's determination. They talked about their father sometimes, sharing memories from when they were small, but they had built their lives around his absence rather than his presence. They were 17 now, about to graduate from high school, about to leave for college, about to start their own adult lives. Rebecca was proud of them, proud of herself, proud of what they had built from the ashes of their broken family. She had survived 15 years of not knowing, 15 years of questions without answers, 15 years of loving a ghost. She thought she had made peace with never knowing what happened to David Kellner. She was wrong. Rebecca's new life began with a business conference she almost did not attend. The Arizona Teachers Association was hosting a 3-day workshop on innovative classroom techniques in Clearwater Falls, a small town 2 hours north of Phoenix. Rebecca had registered months earlier, back when professional development felt important, but by the time May arrived, she was exhausted from end-of-year activities and graduation ceremonies for the twins. Isabella and Sophia were leaving for summer jobs at a camp in Colorado in just 2 weeks, their first real separation from Rebecca since David's disappearance. The house felt too quiet already, too full of memories and empty spaces. Rebecca almost cancelled the conference, almost stayed home to reorganize closets and paint the guest room and do all the busy work that keeps your hands moving when your heart is not ready to be still. But Carmen insisted she go. "You have spent 15 years taking care of everyone except yourself," her mother said, physically packing Rebecca's suitcase while Rebecca protested. 3 days away will not kill you, and it might remind you that there is still life to be lived. So Rebecca drove to Clearwater Falls on a Thursday morning in May, windows down, radio playing songs that reminded her of better times. The town was smaller than Phoenix but charming in its own way, with tree-lined streets and locally owned shops and a main square where old men played chess under striped umbrellas. Rebecca's hotel was walking distance from the conference center, and after checking in and attending the afternoon sessions, she decided to explore the downtown area before dinner. She wandered into a bookstore that smelled like coffee and old paper, bought a novel she would probably never have time to read, then walked across the street to a restaurant called the Garden Bistro. It was the kind of place David would have loved, casual but not sloppy, with handwritten menus and mismatched chairs and local art covering the walls. Rebecca requested a table by the window and ordered a glass of wine, something she rarely did anymore, but felt appropriate for a rare evening alone. She was reading the menu, debating between the salmon and the pasta primavera, when she saw him. He was sitting 3 tables away, facing her direction, but not looking at her, deep in conversation with a woman Rebecca did not recognize. The woman was blonde, petite, probably in her early 40s, wearing a sundress that looked expensive. She was laughing at something the man had said, reaching across the table to touch his hand in a gesture that spoke of long familiarity and deep affection. But Rebecca was not looking at the woman. Rebecca was looking at the man, and her heart stopped beating for what felt like several minutes. It was David. Older, grayer, at the temples, wearing glasses she had never seen before, but definitely, absolutely, impossibly David. The same strong jawline, the same way of tilting his head when he was listening intently, the same habit of drumming his fingers on the table when he was thinking. Rebecca had studied that face for 8 years of marriage and 15 years of memory. She knew every line, every expression, every detail. David Kellner was sitting 20 feet away from his wife, holding hands with another woman, very much alive. Rebecca's wineglass slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the floor in a crash that made every head in the restaurant turn toward her table. The waitress hurried over with a towel and dustpan, asking if Rebecca was okay, if she needed medical attention, if she should call someone. Rebecca nodded and shook her head and made sounds that might have been words, but her eyes never left David's table. He had looked up at the sound of breaking glass, his gaze sweeping the restaurant until it landed on Rebecca's face. For a moment that lasted forever, they stared at each other across 15 years of separation and lies and questions without answers. David's face went completely white, his mouth opening in shock or guilt or recognition. The blonde woman followed his gaze, confusion written across her pretty features. Then David was standing, throwing money on the table, grabbing the woman's hand and pulling her toward the restaurant's back exit. Rebecca tried to stand, tried to follow, but her legs would not support her weight. She sank back into her chair and watched through the window as David helped the blonde woman into a silver SUV, watched as he looked back at the restaurant one more time, watched as he drove away into the gathering darkness. Rebecca sat in the garden bistro until they closed at 10 o'clock, nursing water and trying to convince herself she had imagined the whole thing. Stress, grief, wishful thinking, too much wine on an empty stomach. There had to be a rational explanation that did not involve her dead husband having dinner with another woman in a town 2 hours from home. But deep in her heart, in the place where 15 years of questions lived, Rebecca knew what she had seen. David was alive. David was well. David was happy. And David was not coming home. Rebecca did not sleep that night. She lay in her hotel bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing between disbelief and fury, and a desperate need to understand. By dawn, she had made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out exactly what David Kellner had been doing for the past 15 years. She started with the obvious place, the restaurant's parking lot, where she spent the morning watching for the silver SUV from the night before. By noon, she was questioning her own sanity. What was she planning to do if she saw David again? Confront him in broad daylight, demand answers he clearly did not want to give, call the police and report her dead husband for the crime of being alive. Instead, she drove through Clearwater Falls with no destination in mind, learning the layout of the town, looking for anything that might lead her to David. It was a small community, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. If David lived here, someone would know him. Rebecca found her first real clue at a local hardware store. She had stopped to ask for directions back to the highway, planning to give up her search and drive home to Phoenix, when she noticed a bulletin board covered with business cards and local advertisements. One card, tucked between a flyer for guitar lessons and an ad for house cleaning services, made her heart stop. Kellner Construction Company. We build dreams into reality. Dan Kellner, owner and general contractor. Dan Kellner. David had always hated his first name, said it sounded too formal, too stuffy. As a child, he had insisted everyone call him by his middle name instead. His middle name was Daniel. Rebecca copied the address from the business card, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. Kellner Construction was located in an industrial park on the outskirts of town, a 15-minute drive from the hotel where Rebecca had spent the night convincing herself she was losing her mind. The construction company occupied a large metal building with several work trucks parked outside. The sign by the front door was professionally made, clearly expensive, and featured a logo that made Rebecca's breath catch in her throat. It was a simple design, a house with a tree beside it, but Rebecca recognized it immediately. David had doodled that exact same image on napkins and scrap paper for as long as she had known him, always talking about starting his own construction business someday, always dreaming about the logo he would use. Rebecca sat in her rental car across the street for 2 hours, watching workers come and go, waiting for David to appear. When he finally emerged from the building at 4:30 in the afternoon, he was wearing work clothes and carrying blueprints, looking every inch the successful businessman he had apparently become. He climbed into the silver SUV from the night before and drove away without noticing the woman who had spent 15 years mourning his death. Rebecca followed him, staying far enough back to avoid detection but close enough to see where he was going. David drove through residential neighborhoods that spoke of prosperity and stability, past well-maintained lawns and children playing in driveways, until he turned into the driveway of a 2-story colonial house on Elm Street. The house was beautiful, the kind of home Rebecca and David had dreamed of buying someday. It had a wraparound porch, mature oak trees, and a yard large enough for the swing set and vegetable garden they had always planned. As Rebecca watched from down the street, David parked in the driveway and walked to the front door, where he was greeted by the blonde woman from the restaurant. But she was not alone. 2 children ran out of the house to meet David, a boy who looked to be about 10 years old and a girl who might have been 8. They threw themselves into David's arms with the enthusiasm of children who adore their father, and he lifted them both off the ground in a hug that was achingly familiar to Rebecca. It was the same way he used to greet Isabella and Sophia when they were small. Rebecca watched David's second family for 20 minutes. memorizing details that would haunt her dreams for months to come. The way the blonde woman kissed David's cheek as he carried groceries into the house. The way the little girl showed David something she had drawn, her face glowing with pride as he praised her artwork. The way the boy helped David carry tools from the SUV to the garage, clearly eager to spend time with the man he believed was his father. It was a perfect domestic scene, a snapshot of the life Rebecca had thought she was building with David 15 years ago. Except this time, David had not disappeared. This time, David had stayed. Over the next 3 days, Rebecca learned everything she could about Dan Kellner and his family. She discovered that the blonde woman's name was Patricia Summers, that she worked as a physical therapist at the local hospital, that she had been married to Dan for 12 years. The children were named Christopher and Hannah, and they attended Clearwater Falls Elementary School, where Patricia volunteered as a room mother and Dan helped coach the school's softball team. Dan and Patricia had met at a community fundraiser in 2009, just months after David had disappeared from Phoenix. Their courtship had been brief, but intense, and they had married in a small ceremony at the town's historic church. Dan's construction company had grown steadily over the years, employing 15 people and building a reputation for quality work and fair dealing. The family attended church regularly, participated in community events, and was well regarded by everyone who knew them. They were, by all appearances, genuinely happy. Rebecca also discovered that Dan Kellner had a detailed history that began in January of 2009. Before that date, there was no record of his existence. No birth certificate, no school records, no employment history, no trace of the man who would become Patricia's husband and Christopher and Hannah's father. It was as if Dan Kellner had materialized out of thin air, carrying nothing but a convincing smile and a talent for construction work. But Rebecca knew better. Dan Kellner had not materialized from nothing. Dan Kellner was David Martinez, and David Martinez had walked away from his first family to build a second life with people who would never know his real name. The why of it remained a mystery, but the what was crystal clear. David had not been kidnapped or murdered or lost in the desert. David had chosen to disappear, chosen to let his wife and daughters believe he was dead, chosen to start over with a clean slate and a clear conscience. Rebecca drove back to Phoenix on Sunday morning with a heart full of rage and a plan taking shape in her mind. For 15 years, she had grieved for a man who did not deserve her tears. For 15 years, she had struggled to raise daughters who deserved to know their father. For 15 years, she had lived with questions that David could have answered with a single phone call. Now Rebecca had questions of her own, and she was going to make sure David answered them, whether he wanted to or not. Rebecca spent the summer in a state of controlled fury, planning her next move with the same methodical precision she used to create lesson plans for her classroom. Isabella and Sophia were at summer camp in Colorado, sending postcards full of adventures and inside jokes, blissfully unaware that their mother was planning to destroy the life their father had built without them. The rage was unlike anything Rebecca had ever experienced. It was not the hot, explosive anger that burns bright and fades quickly. This was something colder, more patient, more dangerous. This was the anger of a woman who had spent 15 years believing she was a widow, only to discover she was actually an abandoned wife. Rebecca's first instinct was to drive back to Clearwater Falls and confront David directly. She wanted to stand in his driveway and scream at him until the neighbors called the police, wanted to tell Patricia and Christopher and Hannah exactly who the man they loved really was. She wanted to watch David's perfect second life crumble the way her first life had crumbled 15 years ago. But Rebecca was no longer the trusting young teacher who had fallen in love at a coffee shop. 15 years of single motherhood had taught her patience, strategy, and the importance of thinking 3 steps ahead. If she was going to make David pay for what he had done, she was going to do it right. She hired a private investigator named Marcus Chen, a former police detective who specialized in insurance fraud and missing persons cases. Rebecca told him she suspected her husband had faked his own death, provided him with David's photograph and the information she had gathered in Clearwater Falls, and waited for confirmation of what she already knew. Chen's report arrived 2 weeks later, 30 pages of documentation that painted a picture of careful premeditation and elaborate deception. David had been planning his disappearance for at least 6 months before he vanished, gradually liquidating assets and creating false documents that would allow him to assume a new identity. He had cashed out his retirement account, sold stocks Rebecca had not known he owned, and even taken out a secret loan against their house. The insurance policy David had purchased just months before his disappearance was worth $50,000. But Chen discovered that David had also collected on 2 other policies Rebecca had never known existed: life insurance through his construction company and a personal policy he had purchased online, both naming himself as the beneficiary under his new identity. David had not just abandoned his family, he had profited from their grief. But the most devastating discovery was a safety deposit box David had rented under his real name just days before he disappeared. The box contained cash, false identification documents, and a letter addressed to Rebecca that had never been sent. Chen provided Rebecca with a copy of the letter, and reading it nearly broke what was left of her heart. The letter was full of apologies and excuses, explanations that explained nothing and justifications that justified even less. David wrote about feeling trapped by responsibility, suffocated by the demands of family life, desperate for a fresh start somewhere no one knew his failures. He claimed to love Rebecca and the twins, but love was not enough when weighed against his need for freedom and the chance to become someone better than he was. The letter ended with a promise that someday, when he had built something worthy of their pride, he would return and make everything right. It was dated March 22, 2008, the day before David disappeared. 15 years later, he had clearly decided that someday would never come. Rebecca burned the letter in her backyard fire pit on a hot August night, watching David's words turn to ash while she planned her revenge. She would not simply expose David's deception and destroy his second life. She would make him feel every moment of pain he had caused her and the twins. She would make him understand what it meant to lose everything you love without warning or explanation. Rebecca's plan was elegant in its simplicity. She would become Dan Kellner's worst nightmare, the ghost of his past, come back to haunt his present. She would move to Clearwater Falls, establish herself in the community, and slowly, methodically, make David's life as miserable as he had made hers. She requested a transfer from the Phoenix School District to Clearwater Falls Elementary, citing a desire for a fresh start in a smaller community. Her teaching credentials were excellent, her references glowing, and the school was happy to hire an experienced educator for their 4th grade classes. Rebecca found a small apartment on the same street where David bought his groceries, close enough to his perfect life to make her presence felt, but not so close as to seem obvious. The twins were devastated by Rebecca's decision to move. They had built their lives in Phoenix, made friends, created memories in the house where their father had once lived. But Rebecca convinced them it was time for a new beginning, told them the small-town environment would be better for her mental health, promised they could visit Phoenix whenever they wanted. Isabella and Sophia reluctantly agreed to finish their senior year at Clearwater Falls High School. But Rebecca could see the hurt in their eyes, the confusion about why their mother was suddenly making such drastic changes. She told herself it was necessary, that they would understand someday, when they learned the truth about their father. She told herself many things that summer, most of them lies. By the time Rebecca signed the lease on her apartment in Clearwater Falls, her plan was complete. She would insinuate herself into David's community, earn the trust and friendship of his neighbors, maybe even befriend Patricia and the children. She would become indispensable to their lives, someone they relied on and cared about. And then, when David least expected it, she would reveal who she really was and watch his world collapse. It would be poetic justice, Rebecca told herself. David had destroyed her family by disappearing. She would destroy his family by reappearing. David had built his happiness on the foundation of her grief. She would build her revenge on the foundation of his fear. Rebecca moved to Clearwater Falls on the last weekend of August, 2 weeks before school started, carrying nothing but clothes and 15 years of carefully nursed hatred. She was ready to make David Kellner pay for every tear his daughters had cried, every sleepless night his wife had endured, every moment of pain his disappearance had caused. What Rebecca was not ready for was the possibility that her plan might work too well, or that revenge might cost more than she was prepared to pay. Rebecca's first month in Clearwater Falls went exactly according to plan. She established herself as the friendly new teacher from Phoenix, someone starting fresh after years of struggling as a single mother. The community welcomed her warmly, and several parents volunteered to help her get settled, including a petite blonde physical therapist named Patricia Kellner. Patricia was everything Rebecca had expected her to be, and several things she had not. She was genuinely kind, the sort of person who remembered your coffee order after meeting you once, and always asked about your sick relatives. She was also intelligent, funny, and completely devoted to her family. Within 2 weeks of Rebecca's arrival, Patricia had invited her for dinner, introduced her to the local book club, and offered to help Isabella and Sophia adjust to their new school. The dinner invitation posed Rebecca's first real challenge. Sitting at David's table, eating food Patricia had prepared, watching David interact with the children who called him Daddy, it was almost more than Rebecca could bear. David was polite but distant, clearly uncomfortable with Rebecca's presence, but unable to articulate why without revealing his secret. He kept staring at her when he thought no one was looking, his face a mixture of panic and recognition. Christopher and Hannah Kellner were delightful children, bright and funny, and completely innocent of their father's crimes. Christopher showed Rebecca his rock collection after dinner, explaining the geological properties of each specimen, with the serious enthusiasm of a 10-year-old expert. Hannah performed an elaborate dance routine she had choreographed herself, then asked Rebecca if she had any children of her own. 2 daughters, Rebecca answered, watching David's face carefully. Twins. They are 17 now, about to graduate from high school. David's fork clattered against his plate, and Patricia glanced at him with concern. Are you okay, honey? You look pale. Just tired, David said, not meeting anyone's eyes. Long day at work. But Rebecca saw the truth in his expression. David knew exactly who she was, knew exactly why she was in Clearwater Falls, and was terrified of what she might do next. Good. Let him be afraid. Let him feel a fraction of the fear Rebecca had lived with for 15 years, wondering if her husband was dead or alive, or something worse. Over the following weeks, Rebecca inserted herself deeper into the Kellner family's life. She volunteered to help Patricia with a school fundraiser, offered to tutor Christopher in math, taught Hannah how to braid friendship bracelets. She became the helpful neighbor, the reliable friend, the person Patricia could call when she needed a babysitter or someone to pick up groceries. David watched it all with growing desperation, unable to object without explaining why the new teacher from Phoenix made him so uncomfortable. He began working longer hours, finding excuses to be away from home when Rebecca was around, but he could not avoid her completely. Clearwater Falls was too small, their social circles too interconnected. The breaking point came on a Friday evening in October. Rebecca had volunteered to help Patricia decorate for Hannah's 8th birthday party, and the 2 women were hanging streamers in the Kellner family's backyard when David came home from work. He froze when he saw Rebecca standing on a ladder in his garden, holding the same type of purple balloons he used to buy for Isabella and Sophia's birthday parties. Hello, David, Rebecca said quietly, climbing down from the ladder while Patricia went inside to check on the cake. It was the first time she had spoken his real name aloud since arriving in Clearwater Falls. David's face went completely white. What do you want? Justice, Rebecca answered. Truth. An explanation for why you let your daughters believe their father was dead while you were playing house with someone else's children. You do not understand, David said, his voice barely above a whisper. I could not breathe in that life. I was drowning, disappearing a little more every day. I had to start over, or I was going to die. So you chose to let us die, instead. Rebecca stepped closer, her voice steady, despite the rage coursing through her veins. Do you know what Isabella asked me on her 16th birthday? She asked if you would have stayed if she and Sophia had been better daughters. Do you know what that did to me, David? Do you know what it did to them? David's eyes filled with tears, but Rebecca felt no sympathy. 15 years too late for tears. 15 years too late for remorse. I was going to come back, David said. Someday, when I had something to offer them, when I could be the father they deserved. When? Rebecca demanded. When they graduated. When they got married. When they had children of their own. When exactly were you planning to rise from the dead and explain why you chose strangers over your own family? David had no answer, because there was no answer that would make sense of what he had done. He had abandoned his responsibilities, stolen from his family, and built his happiness on a foundation of lies. There was no justification for that. no excuse that would hold water. "What do you want?" David asked again. Rebecca smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "I want you to tell Patricia and Christopher and Hannah who you really are. I want you to explain to them that their perfect father and husband is actually a fraud who abandoned his first family to play house with them. I want you to watch their faces when they realize everything they believe about you is a lie." "You cannot do that to them," David said, desperation making his voice crack. "They are innocent. They do not deserve to pay for my mistakes." "Neither did Isabella and Sophia," Rebecca replied, "but they paid anyway. They paid every day for 15 years, while you were here playing the devoted family man." Patricia's voice drifted from the kitchen, calling for David to come taste the frosting on Hannah's birthday cake. It was such a normal domestic moment, the kind of moment Rebecca had missed thousands of times over the past 15 years. The kind of moment David had chosen to experience with another woman's children while his own daughters grew up without him. "I will give you 24 hours, Rebecca said. "Tell them yourself, or I will tell them for you. But either way, they are going to know the truth about David Martinez." She turned to walk away, her revenge finally within reach, but David grabbed her arm. "Please," he said, and the desperate edge in his voice made Rebecca pause. "There has to be another way, some way to handle this, that does not destroy innocent people." Rebecca looked at David's face, really looked at it for the first time since she had discovered him in this stolen life. He looked older than his 45 years, worn down by the weight of maintaining his deception. There were lines around his eyes that had not been there 15 years ago, grey in his hair that spoke of stress and secrets. He looked, Rebecca realized, like a man who had been running for a very long time and was finally too tired to keep going. For just a moment, Rebecca felt something that might have been pity, but then she remembered Isabella asking if she was the reason Daddy left, remembered Sophia crying herself to sleep on Father's Day, remembered 15 years of struggling alone, while David built a new life with people who would never know his real name. "You had 15 years to find another way," Rebecca said, pulling her arm free from David's grip. 24 hours, David. Choose wisely." But as Rebecca walked back toward her apartment, she had no idea that David had already made his choice, or that his decision would change everything she thought she knew about justice and revenge. David did not wait 24 hours. Rebecca was grading papers at her kitchen table when the knock came at her door. It was just past 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, and through her window she could see David standing on her apartment steps, with his hands shoved deep in his pockets, and his shoulders hunched against the October wind. When Rebecca opened the door, she was surprised to see that David was not alone. Patricia stood beside him, her face pale but determined, holding the hands of Christopher and Hannah. All 4 members of the Kellner family were there, and from the looks on their faces, Rebecca realized that David had already told them everything. "May we come in?" Patricia asked, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Rebecca stepped aside, her carefully planned confrontation suddenly spinning out of her control. She had expected David to confess privately, expected to watch his family's shock and anger from a distance. She had not expected them to show up at her door together, united in their knowledge of David's deception. They settled in Rebecca's small living room, the children sitting close to Patricia, while David remained standing by the window. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Patricia spoke. "David told us who he really is," she said quietly. "He told us about you, about Isabella and Sophia, about everything he did 15 years ago." Rebecca waited for the anger, the accusations, the defense of the man they had believed to be Dan Kellner. Instead, Patricia reached into her purse and pulled out a worn photograph. "He showed us this," Patricia said, handing the picture to Rebecca. It was a family photo Rebecca had not seen in years, one that had been taken at a company picnic just months before David disappeared. David was holding 3-year-old Isabella on his shoulders, while 2-year-old Sophia clung to Rebecca's hand, and both parents were laughing at something happening just outside the camera's range. They looked happy, whole, completely unaware that their perfect family was about to shatter. "You were beautiful together," Patricia said, and there was no bitterness in her voice, only sadness. "The children were beautiful." Rebecca stared at the photograph, remembering that day with perfect clarity. David had been teaching the twins to skip stones in the lake. and Isabella had insisted on trying even though her little hands could barely hold the smooth rocks. David had been endlessly patient, crouching beside her and guiding her arm through the motion until she managed to make a stone skip twice across the water. She had been so proud, so happy to make her daddy smile. "Why are you here?" Rebecca asked, not looking up from the photograph. "Because we need to understand," Patricia said. "David made a terrible choice 15 years ago. But we need to understand why. We need to know what kind of man we have been living with all these years." David spoke for the first time since entering Rebecca's apartment. "I told them everything," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "About the depression I could not admit to having. About feeling trapped by responsibilities I thought I was too young for. About being too much of a coward to ask for help or admit I was struggling." Rebecca finally looked up from the photograph. "That does not excuse what you did." "No," David agreed. "It does not. Nothing excuses what I did to you and the twins. But Patricia and the kids deserve to understand that the man they know, the man I became after I got help, is not the same person who ran away 15 years ago." "Got help?" Rebecca repeated. Patricia nodded. "When we met, David was seeing a therapist for depression and anxiety. He told me he had been through a difficult period in his life, made some terrible decisions he was trying to make amends for. I thought he meant financial problems or legal troubles. I never imagined—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Hannah, who had been quietly listening to the adult conversation, suddenly spoke up. "Are Isabella and Sophia our sisters?" The question hit Rebecca like a physical blow. In all her planning for revenge, she had never considered how her daughters would fit into David's second family, never thought about the relationships that might form between children who shared a father but not a life. "Half-sisters," Rebecca answered carefully. "You and Christopher share a father with Isabella and Sophia." Christopher, who had been staring at his hands throughout the conversation, looked up for the first time. "Do they know about us?" Rebecca shook her head. "They do not know your father is alive." The weight of that admission settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Two families, both built on the same foundation of David's choices, both damaged by secrets they had not chosen to keep. "What happens now?" Patricia asked. It was the question Rebecca had been avoiding since she moved to Clearwater Falls. In all her planning for revenge, she had focused on destroying David's happiness, but had given little thought to what would come after. She had wanted to make him pay for abandoning his first family, but she had not considered the cost to his second family or to herself. "I do not know," Rebecca admitted. David moved away from the window and sat down across from Rebecca, his movements careful and deliberate. "I know what I want to happen," he said. "I want to try to make things right, if that is even possible after 15 years. "How?" Rebecca asked. "By telling Isabella and Sophia the truth. By facing whatever consequences come from that. By trying to be the father I should have been from the beginning, even if it is too late to undo the damage I caused." Rebecca studied David's face, looking for signs of the man she had once loved beneath the features worn by 15 years of lies. She found traces of him there, glimpses of the person who had built blanket forts and braided little girls' hair and promised to love her forever. "And your family here?" Rebecca asked, gesturing toward Patricia and the children. "They are my family too," David said simply. "I cannot undo the life I built with them any more than I can undo the life I abandoned with you. All I can do is try to be honest from now on, and hope that somehow, all of you can forgive me for the person I used to be." Patricia reached for David's hand, a gesture that should have filled Rebecca with jealousy, but instead made her feel oddly relieved. Whatever else David had done, he had built something real and good with Patricia and her children. They deserved to keep that, even if Rebecca could never forgive the cost of its creation. "The twins come home for Thanksgiving," Rebecca said finally. "You can tell them then, if you want to. They deserve to hear it from you." David nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," Rebecca said. "Wait until you see how they react to learning their father chose to fake his own death rather than be their parent." It was a harsh thing to say, but it was also true. Isabella and Sophia would have to decide for themselves whether David deserved forgiveness or condemnation, whether his explanations were enough to heal 15 years of abandonment. As the Kellner family prepared to leave, Hannah tugged on Rebecca's sleeve. "Will you tell Isabella and Sophia about us?" she asked. "Will you tell them we did not know?" Rebecca knelt down to Hannah's level, seeing David's eyes in the little girl's face, but also seeing innocence that deserved protection. "I will tell them," Rebecca promised, "and maybe someday, if everyone is ready, you can tell them yourself." After they left, Rebecca sat alone in her apartment, holding the photograph Patricia had returned to her. She had gotten everything she wanted when she moved to Clearwater Falls. David's secret was exposed, his perfect life disrupted, his carefully constructed identity shattered. She had her revenge. So why did it feel so much like defeat? 3 months later, Rebecca stood in the Phoenix airport waiting for Isabella and Sophia's flight to arrive. Thanksgiving had been awkward but not catastrophic, a careful dance of emotions and explanations that left everyone exhausted but alive. The twins had listened to David's confession with the same composure they had shown throughout their childhood, asking practical questions and avoiding emotional ones. Isabella wanted to know why David had never sent money or letters, why he had let them struggle financially when he was apparently successful enough to own his own business. Sophia wanted to know if he had ever thought about them, if he had wondered what they were growing up to be, if he was proud of their accomplishments. David answered as honestly as he could, admitting to selfishness and cowardice and a depression he had not known how to handle. He apologized repeatedly, not asking for forgiveness, but acknowledging the pain he had caused. The twins listened without offering absolution or condemnation, taking time to process revelations that changed the fundamental facts of their childhood. Now they were coming home for Christmas break, and Rebecca still did not know where any of them stood. The twins had agreed to visit Clearwater Falls, to meet Patricia and Christopher and Hannah, but Rebecca could not predict how those meetings would go. Too much hurt, too many years, too many competing claims on David's attention and love. Rebecca had learned something unexpected during those difficult months. Revenge was not nearly as satisfying as she had imagined it would be. Watching David's face crumble as he confessed to his daughters, seeing Patricia struggle to reconcile the man she loved with the man who had abandoned his first family, witnessing Christopher and Hannah's confusion about their father's hidden past. None of it had made Rebecca feel better about her own pain. Instead, she felt oddly empty, like someone who had spent years planning an elaborate meal only to discover she was not hungry. The anger that had sustained her through 15 years of single motherhood was gone, replaced by something harder to define. Not forgiveness, exactly, but perhaps understanding. David had made terrible choices, but he had also tried to build something good from the wreckage of those choices. Rebecca had returned to teaching in Phoenix, leaving Clearwater Falls and the apartment where she had planned David's downfall. She could not stay in the town where David's second family lived, could not pretend to be Patricia's friend while harboring so much complicated history, but she also could not pretend that Patricia and her children did not exist, could not erase them from the equation of David's life. The situation was messier than Rebecca had anticipated, more complicated than simple justice or revenge could address. David owed debts to 2 families, had responsibilities to children in 2 different towns, had created a situation that could not be solved by choosing one life over the other. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps real life was messier than fairy tales, more complex than the simple narratives of right and wrong that Rebecca had been telling herself for 15 years. Perhaps the only way forward was to accept the complications, embrace the messiness, and try to build something new from the pieces of what had been broken. As Rebecca watched her daughters emerge from the airplane terminal, grown women now with their own dreams and plans, and complicated feelings about the father they had rediscovered, she realized that her greatest lesson had nothing to do with David's betrayal or her own revenge. The lesson was about resilience, about the human capacity to survive devastating loss and still find reasons to hope. Rebecca had raised 2 extraordinary daughters despite David's abandonment, had built a career and a life and a sense of purpose from the ruins of her broken marriage. That was not nothing, that was everything. David's return did not diminish what Rebecca had accomplished in his absence. His second family did not negate the first family he had left behind. The complicated truth of their situation did not erase the simple fact that Rebecca had survived, thrived, and raised children who were strong enough to handle whatever came next. If you have made it this far in our journey together, you understand that life rarely offers simple answers to complicated questions. Families break apart, and sometimes, in unexpected ways, they find new ways to fit together. People make terrible choices, and sometimes, if they are lucky, they get chances to make better ones. The most powerful revenge, Rebecca learned, was not destruction but survival. Not tearing down what others had built, but building something beautiful from what they had left behind. What challenges in your own life might be transformed from sources of bitterness into foundations for strength? Sometimes the greatest victory is simply refusing to let someone else's choices define the limits of your own happiness. Thank you for walking through this difficult but ultimately hopeful story with me. If it resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to explore more stories about resilience, redemption, and the complicated ways families heal and grow, please subscribe to True Crime Village for new episodes every week.